Progressive voice is so often underrepresented in the media. To have my voice represented along with that of so many other religious progressive people is a huge step forward in my world.
When you have people who come together from all different walks of life, becomes a black thing or a white thing, no longer becomes a Democrat thing or a Republican thing, but it becomes a people thing. It becomes a human issue. And when people are able to recognize the human side of what's going on, then a piece of them, whether they recognize it or not, begins to connect with that. And then it's up to them whether or not they act on it. And having that voice allows people that opportunity to act on that piece that flows through them.
Bringing a progressive voice to the public square makes sure that we are able to fight back against those extreme voices, but also make sure that there is a progressive point of view put out there in the public square, defending people's rights, making sure that we are working toward equality and equity and inclusion, and making sure that we're doing so with civility.
Good evening, and welcome again to the 2024 Interfaith Alliance of Iowa Award Dinner. Speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors, we are thrilled that you're here. My name is John McCormick, and it's been my privilege to be the chair of this board for the last number of years, and I can tell you, I have never seen this room look this great. It is amazing at the crowd that we have here, and I know that there are a lot of people that are here for the first time with us tonight. The first time I came to this dinner was about a dozen years ago, and it came at a time when 3 Iowa Supreme Court justices had just been removed from the court because of the efforts of religious extremism. Now, I came into this room fairly cynical about the way religion and faith are manipulated in politics, and I didn't know much about this organization. But what I learned is that this organization brings together from people across the state of different faith traditions in support of fair and impartial courts, in support of civil rights for all, religious freedom for all, and for civility in the public square. The Varnum decision that brought me to that first interfaith dinner led to a backlash that was vicious. And I don't know if you remember this, the campaign that was against our Supreme Court justices. I know Justice Marcia Turnus is here in the room tonight, and I would like to say once again, thank you to her and her colleagues on the court. That decision not only changed the game in Iowa, it was cited by the U.S. Supreme Court when marriage equality became the law of the land in Obergefell, and that decision changed things for the better. But we still have scars from that backlash. And if you're familiar with the writing of our special guest tonight, Professor Heather Cox Richardson, you know that religious extremism and backlash is not limited to Iowa or even a particularly new feature of our democracy. We're very thankful to Professor Richardson for being with us tonight, and I'm eager to hear her in conversation with Rekha Basu, a gifted writer in her own right, having a conversation about our democracy later this evening. The fundamental tension in a government of the people, for the people, by the people, is, the people. People are flawed, right? We make mistakes, we can act irrationally. I mean, you've met some of these people. Do we really want them in charge? I will tell you that Winston Churchill may have said that the best argument against democracy is 5 minutes with the average voter. I believe that if you change that to the average Iowa legislator, you could probably make the argument in less than a minute. No offense to present company. We have some very, very dedicated and just passionate legislators that are with us tonight, and we owe them our support, and we owe them our gratitude and our thanks. It has not been easy at the Iowa State Capitol in the last few years. these are strange times. It's not just in Iowa. Democracy itself is up for debate. If you turn on the news today, you will hear people talking about that maybe we should have a strongman form of government, like in Hungary or Turkey or Russia. And it seems like some people, some very loud people, have lost faith in the idea of democracy, lost faith in our courts, lost faith in the idea of our ability to govern ourselves. And it's going to take some work to restore that faith in democracy. Doing the work is one reason why the League of Women Voters stands out. For over 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked to protect democracy and expand voting rights as the foundational pillar of democracy. Maybe just as important, the League of Women Voters has long been a trusted source of voter information, and this is a time when trusted sources of information are increasingly hard to come by. The League of Women Voters has partnered with Interfaith in recent times to on such diverse issues as reproductive freedom and governmental transparency and public education and voting rights. We are honoring them tonight with our Partner Organization Award for that collaboration, but also for the years of protecting free and fair elections. But there is one other aspect of the League of Women Voters that I would like to lift up, and that is the memory of Dr. Deb Turner. For those of you who did not know Dr. Turner, she's difficult to summarize briefly, but she was a doctor in Des Moines for many years. She was a gynecological oncologist who also had a JD and earned honors from both the American Medical Association and the American Bar Association. And if you know anything about doctors and lawyers, they don't always agree. They agreed on Deb Turner. She was also the president of the National League of Women Voters for the previous 4 years, and she keynoted this dinner just 2 years ago. Our theme that year was Inspired Voices. Dr. Turner certainly inspired us that night. She had just come on to the board of directors of the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa in January when she passed away. And we will miss her wisdom and her compassion. So please join me in a moment of silent reflection in the memory of Dr. Deb Turner. Thank you. We also remember the voice of Joy Corning. Joy was the former lieutenant governor of Iowa and one of the founders of the Alliance. We have named our annual Public Leader Award after Joy, and tonight we're giving that award to Iowa State Auditor Rob Sant. Now, this is a little awkward for me, because Rob is my boss in my day job. And while I am genuinely privileged to work with him, and I'm very, very proud of the work that he does promoting governmental transparency, he also has a very strict rule in the office that we are not allowed to compliment him. So on the off chance that he sees receiving an award recognizing him for public service in front of a large audience as a compliment, I recused myself from the board decision on this matter. Doesn't seem to me that recusal is that hard. Around the office, Rob likes to quote a different Supreme Court justice. He tells us, "Fight for the things you believe in, but do it in a way that makes others want to join in." It's, of course, from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Rob really believes that. He is a true believer in democracy, and he has the utmost faith in his fellow citizens, and it is refreshing, the example he is trying to set in public office. Faith is essential to democracy. Democracy needs faith. It requires people to believe in each other, to believe in their fellow citizens. Extremist movements come and go and then come back again and go away again. Progress is made in fits and starts, but democracy as the idea is not going anywhere. The moral arc of the universe is long, and to me, this organization, the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, is what democracy can and should look like. Muslim, Jew, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, atheist, agnostic, all collaborating together in the public square for the common good. In her posting that she had yesterday, Professor Richardson laid out the tenets of democracy in writing about the genesis of the Marshall Plan. And she argued that America's gift at the end of World War II was not the money, although that certainly helped, but what really led to a more peaceful and prosperous Europe was the adoption of the democratic ideals after World War II. These are the same ideals championed by the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa: equality before the law, secularism, civil rights, economic and political freedom. These are the core tenets of democracy. The other tenet Professor Richardson described is a market economy as helping lead Europe. And in the spirit of that, I'd like to say, we know you have a choice in nonprofit organizations that you might support. And when you're considering which pro-democracy organizations you'd like to support, we hope you choose the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. We do monthly events convening faith leaders and public officials and interested citizens in Cedar Rapids every month. It's called Crossroads. In Des Moines, it's called Intersections. You can learn more about those events on the Interfaith website or by talking with Bridget or Kristen Clark and the amazing folks that work at Interfaith, or by asking Connie Ryan. Now, Connie is our executive director. She spends the legislative session advocating on behalf of our issues in front of the Iowa legislature, and at the same time, she's convening marches and vigils and rallies, public conversations, including Moral Mondays, which have become an important part of conversation during the legislative session. Connie is very busy. Last week, she was in Washington, where she was presented with a National Interfaith Alliance Award. And if you look at who else she was awarded with, you'll notice House Impeachment Manager Jamie Raskin and Senator Raphael Warnock, pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. That is the company that Connie Ryan keeps. We are so proud and so thankful to have her with us. And I'd like her to come up onto the stage now, because to me, she will always be the woman who, like me, has the misfortune of sharing a birthday with Richard Nixon. Connie, thank you.
Good evening. It's kind of amazing to stand up here and look out at this room and this crowd. We are so grateful and excited that we get to share this evening with you. Thank you for being here and for all of your support. It's good to be together and feel the positive energy in a room full of progressive Iowans who are committed to including and amplifying diverse voices, defending our democracy, safeguarding the rights of all people, and perhaps most importantly these days, challenging extremism. Thank you. As you just heard, I spend a lot of my waking hours during the legislative session at the State House, typically arriving before 7 a.m., leaving whenever I am done for the day. I don't say that for applause and certainly not sympathy. I tell you that to say that I have seen and experienced a lot during my 14 sessions at the State House. What you learn by being in the room opens your eyes to an entirely different way of doing things and is the only way to make a difference in that work. The legislators in this room, current and retired, my lobby colleagues, and the longtime advocates know exactly what I am talking about. The State House is a fascinating place. The calm in the early morning before the storm of the day. Formal hearings filled with rules and procedures, some of which are made up on the spot. Critical side conversations that happen organically when you find yourself in the right place at the right time. Organizations and advocates vying for attention with pamphlets and displays, and sometimes a mascot or two. And of course, legislators doing the work of the people, or at least some of them trying to do so. And then there are the demonstrations, occasionally quiet or even silent, but mostly energetic and loud. Whether at the State House or in communities big and small, Iowa has seen its fair share of demonstrations over the last 8 years. Protests and rallies and vigils, sometimes organized by us, many organized by our partner organizations, and more often a whole gaggle of us working together. Because these are tough times, hard times. Especially when we feel the harm to others rattling deep in our souls. The harm being perpetrated against the LGBTQ community. Harm against women. Harm against Black and brown communities. Harm against minority religious communities. Harm against immigrants. Harm against labor unions and working folks. Harm against those who live with poverty. Harm against our children. But January 31st of this year was an amazing day. On that day, House Republicans held competing subcommittee meetings pushing two of the most egregious and most harmful pieces of legislation during a session filled with bills of the same nature. The two bills were the governor's original AEA bill and the anti-trans bill designed to remove gender identity from the Civil Rights Code and make being transgender a disability in Iowa. Okay, to clarify, when I said it was an amazing day, the bills were not what I was talking about. At one point that day, I stood in the very big, very wide, and long hallway outside the old Supreme Court chambers and the smaller room beside it. Really, just people watching. I had been in both packed rooms earlier, but decided to step outside as demonstrations, protesters, chanted and shouted, and many waved pride or trans rights flags. Too many people and their very big feelings to fit inside the constraints and limits of too small of meeting rooms. So many people using their voices and demonstrating for the power of the people. So many people demonstrating at some lawmakers who were hell-bent on doing harm to our education system and our trans community. So many people showing up to say, actually, this is what democracy looks like, and we will not sit idly by. There's a lot of extremism in our midst these days, much of it hiding in the shadows of, or, if I'm completely honest with myself, standing on the shoulders of organized religion. Religious extremism, commonly referred to as Christian nationalism. Let's be clear. Christian nationalism is an ideology and has nothing to do with Christianity or its teachings. Christian nationalism is about power, not about love and mercy. Those espousing Christian nationalist ideology justify their hate and bigotry and often their actions of violence through the misuse of Christianity, which is simply a tool for them, a means to justify the rhetoric and the violence to gain power. Organized religion, particularly Christianity, has its own history and demons in terms of perpetuating hate and bigotry and violence. Christian nationalism is simply standing on and benefiting from that history. On another day during the 2024 legislative session, Republicans finally passed and signed into law the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, commonly called RFRA. RFRA has become a means in other states to justify discrimination via someone's personal religious beliefs. It elevates one person's religion and religious freedom above the civil rights of others. It was a heartbreaking day when RFRA passed. We knew what it meant for our beloved state, and more importantly, the harm it will cause our neighbors and loved ones. But we also are not ones to sit idly by. We are not quitters. With the help of many partner organizations, faith communities, and you, we are pushing back and sending a different message that all are welcome in Iowa. Regardless of the passage of RFRA, any justification for hate and bigotry cloaked in religious garments is not welcome in Iowa. You're going to get an email tomorrow, warning. It's going to have a link to the All Are Welcome in Iowa page on our website where you can click through and sign up to be part of this effort. I hope you will join us to help pass resolutions in your communities across the state to say loudly and clearly, all are welcome here. Last year at this event, I talked about courage and how courage is necessary to make positive change. I urged these 4 things. Don't sit idly by, be in the room, be part of the effort. 2, bring others along with you. 3, ask candidates if they will uphold their pledge to the Constitution if their religious beliefs conflict with the constitutional rights of others. And 4, get involved, including in voter registration and civic engagement efforts. Together is the only way we will be successful in challenging the extremism in our midst, our democracy, our state, and certainly its people are worth the work, because this is what democracy looks like. Thank you. I would like to invite to the stage our presenters and awardees while the video plays. All of the work that Interfaith Alliance of Iowa does is in collaboration. I can't think of an issue that we do that we're not working with other ally and partner organizations or building relationships to strengthen the work that we do and strengthen the work that they do.
Well, collaboration is incredibly important, and I believe if an issue comes up, our first thought is to call Interfaith Alliance and see where they are and what they're doing and who they're convening, because we know that Interfaith Alliance is a leader on a lot of those issues.
The Alliance has been the voice for so many people without us even knowing it. You know, before I knew that the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa existed, I was just one person and one voice. And as I watched the things that would be introduced at the state legislature being pushed forward, and I can't be in Des Moines every day, you know, making my voice heard, and I'm so thankful that the Interfaith Alliance was there. The Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, very well respected. And so by having Connie's voice there representing my voice was a gift.
This fight is also about economics. This is about healthcare. This is about education. This is about real social justice and real policy work. This is about changing not just peoples, but systems. And when you have moments of partnership, when you bring these people to the table and you have this, it really gives us all an opportunity to stand up and show a united front.
I think at a time when our communities are so fractured, having a strong, progressive voice, a strong convener organization like Interfaith Alliance is critical to our progressive issues surviving and us building a brighter future.
Good evening. Empowering voters, defending democracy. That is the tagline for the League of Women Voters of Iowa. And no one in our state works harder at these goals than the League, doing so with consistency and integrity. While highly respected for its strong commitment to nonpartisanship, the League never shies away from the hard work of advocacy to defend democracy and fight for individual rights that are important for all Iowans. Reproductive rights, gun safety, public funds for public schools, transparency in government, citizen participation, and of course, voting rights. In striving to do all this work, the League of Women Voters of Iowa always comes back to its core, empowering voters and defending democracy. The League lives out its mission and goals through its leadership on the issues, always willing to provide a strong public voice, demonstrating an important presence at the State House during the legislative session, providing educational opportunities on how to more effectively participate in our democracy, supporting the local affiliates of the League and communities across the state, working collaboratively with other organizations because they understand that we are stronger together. As a valued and critical partner in this ongoing work to challenge extremism in our midst, the League of Women Voters of Iowa is one of the best examples of demonstrating what democracy can and should look like. It is my honor to present the Partner Organization Award to the League of Women Voters of Iowa in recognition of your strong and vital voice in protecting the rights of Iowans and defending our democracy.
Oh, wow. I'm humbled and honored by receiving this award this evening. My name is Therese Grant, and with me is Holly Appelt, and we are the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. And as I said, we are extremely honored to being chosen for the Partner Organization Award from the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa this evening. Interfaith Alliance is an extraordinary organization that is a leader in so many ways. We have worked together on a variety of issues in the past: voting rights, gun safety, reproductive rights, and so much more. We share a common mission with our organizations: defending democracy. The League has worked with Connie Ryan, the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance, and with our shared priorities at the Capitol during this legislative session, and many of those in the past several years as well. Our efforts have not always produced the outcomes we would like, but that just makes us more determined the next time. As co-president, I have established a very good relationship with Executive Director Connie Ryan. She contacted me a few years ago to interview me about the League's role in voting rights. After that initial encounter, the League began to collaborate more with Interfaith Alliance. It was perfect timing because we were beginning to realize that the League could no longer act alone, but we needed to work with our other organizations to have our voices heard. This has been such a valuable cooperative effort, and we will continue to work with Interfaith Alliance as much as possible in the future. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Iowa, Holly and I are extremely honored to accept the Partner Organization Award this evening from Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. Thank you.
The mission of the state auditor is to serve as the taxpayer's watchdog, working to help ensure government officials use taxpayer dollars for the intended purposes to benefit the public. State Auditor Rob Sands has served the people of Iowa exceedingly well because his unwavering commitment to that mission, his tenacity in ensuring it is carried out, and his deep understanding that the good of the people rests in the hands of unselfish public servants who have the best interests of the state and its residents at heart. Rob is committed not only to the ideas of transparency, efficiency, and accountability in government, but he has worked diligently to ensure that Iowans reap the benefits of those ideals. Even when he and the Office of State Auditor are under attack by those who do not have the best interest of Iowans or our state in mind, Rob Sands takes the high road and continues to be committed to the idea that we are better together, and the best way to do government is in a nonpartisan manner that benefits all the people. Iowa State Auditor Rob Sands sees and understands the bigger picture of what a strong democracy looks like, or can look like, where all Iowans thrive because a government that is working for the people and fairness succeeds. It is my honor to present the Joy Corning Public Leader Award to State Auditor Rob Sands in recognition of your unwavering determination to represent all Iowans and to strengthen our democracy.
Hi, everybody. That's a new record for the fastest comment on what I should do with my future. I do want to say thank you to the Interfaith Coalition. Thank you. I also want to say thank you to my wife. She is not here tonight, and that is fine. She has things to do also. And if you ever like anything that I have done, you should keep in mind that I can't do it without her support. And if you see her, you should be on your best behavior. I want to say thanks to my immediate family. My sister and my parents are here. My mom has never been prouder in her life until tonight, when she is finally in the same room as Heather Cox Richardson. You all are laughing like that was a joke. It's not a joke. I can't tell you how right it feels that a faith-based organization gives an award for public service. Public service. Does anybody in this room think that their highest calling is to be a Democrat or a Republican? Me neither. Then what are we doing? Why do we find ourselves here? What I do when I make decisions in the auditor's office, I continually realize is driven by the faith that I grew up with. We went to church every Sunday. I've got an aunt who's made a living doing religious artwork, an uncle who's a bishop in the ELCA. When the Sand family gets together, we don't necessarily just say grace, we also sing it. My second son's name is Axel, even though when Christine suggested it, I was Because when I looked it up in the big book of Scandinavian names, it meant Father of Peace. And I immediately thought of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. That's for us right now, to be the peacemakers. The first thing that I did was promote people to deputy positions in the auditor's office, the highest position in the office. The two people I promoted were an independent and a Republican who had made campaign contributions to my opponent. Why? Something about turning the other cheek. When we get asked to do investigations, we do them. And we tell the people the truth, whether or not it's critical of a Democrat or exoneration for a Republican. Why? Something about not bearing false witness. I just announced, this is crazy, I just announced we're setting a new high water mark this year for accessibility for a statewide elected official. We aren't just doing 99 county tour, we're doing the 100 town hall tour. Every one of the visits is a town hall. And for the first time ever, a statewide elected official in the state of Iowa has announced all 100 at the same time, at least 2 weeks before the first one even starts. Why? Because I worship a guy who wanted to have a meal with the people who thought that they were the lowliest. Because I worship a guy who wanted to be seen with the people that other people wouldn't be caught dead with. Because I want people in the state of Iowa to know that the job of public service, the mission that we are all supposed to be pursuing if we work for the government, if we work for the people, is to be there for everyone, not just the few, not just those who put themselves first, but those who put themselves last, or maybe just happen to be there. The more that we can do that, the better we can do. Right? And it has to come from us if we want change. We can't just look at someone else and ask them, why do you keep doing things wrong? We can only control ourselves. We have to remember the serenity prayer, right? And we can't control other people, we just control ourselves. If there's one more thing, it's to say this. What I've been talking about is the idea of inclusion. And if there's one thing that should never happen in the state of Iowa, it is any human being being made to feel unwelcome in the name of religion. Thank you.
Interfaith Alliance challenges the status quo. It leads in a collaborative spirit and empowers anyone with a heart to serve to join in the fight. That, my friends, is what advocacy looks like. And I couldn't be more proud of this organization.
We both feel strongly that everyone ought to be able to practice and live their own religion or philosophy of life without fear or discrimination.
And no one ought to be allowed to impose their religion or philosophy onto another. Bridget and I don't believe that our religion or philosophy has a monopoly on moral behavior.
That is why we support Interfaith Alliance of Iowa with a monthly donation. Joe and I believe that we are better people because of the diversity that exists among us. We love celebrating and being connected to the many ways that Iowans are finding their best way.
We hope you will join us and make a donation to Interfaith Alliance of Iowa today.
All right. Hey, who are you?
I'm a little tired, but I think I'm a community advocate by now, for sure.
Well, thank you to everyone who has supported tonight's event. The award celebration is our biggest fundraiser of the year and enables us to do the work, our critical programming work, day in and day out. So your support means so much to us, and we couldn't do it without every single person who is in this room and hundreds of other folks across the state.
Everyone in this room, can we get serious for a moment? Can we get serious for a moment?
Yes.
Will you all agree with me that we are in a very pivotal time in our country and especially in our state? Would you agree? Would you agree?
Yes.
I would also agree with you that the stakes are high. Yes? Yes? This is why I chose to get politically engaged and why I'm also a board member for Interfaith. You see, what's happening right now in our state is we have people who are proud Christian nationalisms, and I'm using that on purpose. That's not a typo. And they are passing real-life bills that will affect you and I in this room, that will affect your neighbors, that will affect your family members, your friends, your community. And let me tell you, I have a 2-year-old named Eli, and if he was here, he has main character syndrome, so he would be standing here with us if he could be. But it will affect him as well. It will affect our children and our grandchildren. We cannot let a false narrative of religious freedom be used as justification to diminish or even erase our friends and our families' basic civil rights. We cannot do that. So, here it is. We must work together to move our state in the direction that is and truly a welcoming place for all. Can you say that with me? A welcoming place for all.
And we're in a unique position. The voice of people of faith and all beliefs is critical as we fight for our democracy and push back on hate, bigotry, and extremism. We are committed at the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa to continue our work in fighting religious extremism and for the rights of all Iowans. We work on a lot of issues, but there are 2 big projects that I want to highlight tonight, and I want to ask you for your financial support with those projects. The first one, we've been talking a lot about it, is fighting against Christian nationalism. We all know the rising power of Christian nationalists has had a devastating impact across our nation and in Iowa, especially on marginalized communities. We are speaking out and challenging their harmful narrative and educating Iowans on its impact. We have done so much good work on this issue, and we're just getting started. The other I want to highlight is pushing back on the RFRA legislation. Connie talked about this in her speech. We're calling this work All Are Welcome in Iowa. We're educating and empowering Iowans to reject its message of hate and bigotry and amplifying this message that all are welcome in Iowa. So this is just some of the work. There's more information about our priority projects in your program. It's right here on the last page. All right.
So this is a moment that we all can participate and be involved in. This is a space that we all can come together and make sure that we're pushing the ideas of love, compassion, and understanding of our neighbors. So I have a question. Has anybody felt inspired tonight? I have another question. Can we do this together?
Yes.
So last year, I asked this room to raise $7,500, and we met that goal. So we have much more work to do. So I'm going to ask, can this room raise $10,000 this year? If we did 75 last year with who we had in the room, can we do 10,000 tonight? I heard one yes. So let me ask again. Can we do that tonight? If we do this together, I want you all to understand that you here are our guest. We hope you will help us reach this goal. But the only way that we do things, and this is what we've been talking about when we are believing in each other, is we have the opportunity to work together to accomplish goals. And right here at Interfaith, we can do this tonight. So I ask again, can we raise $10,000 tonight?
Yes. So if you're here as a guest, we hope you will make a donation. If you're a sponsor or bought a ticket, we hope you will consider an extra gift. And we are going to make this really easy on you. So we're going to take a few minutes. We have some board members, folks that are ready to take donations. So you have envelopes at your table. We also have a fancy QR code on the back of your program that you can scan that and make a donation online, or you can go to interfaithallianceiowa.org. So we're going to get off the stage. The faster you make your gift, the quicker Heather and Reka get on. So
most people know we're raising an offering. We got this tonight.
all right.
Let's go do it,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you.
If you make your donation, can you hold that up, Bridget? If you make your donation in the envelope, please just hold it up and someone will come collect it.
Yeah, you get me. Yeah, you get me. You've got no objections to my imperfections, all of my quirks and crazy obsessions. Yeah, you get me. And I can't believe I get you. It's been a long week, don't wanna think about it, I just wanna get away. Now I'm in the club, rise catch for a moment, this is the perfect escape. We hit the floor, love the way your body's moving, get closer, show me how you wanna do it, I know we're running out of time. Tonight, let it go. Let the music take control. Tonight, let it go. Let's see how this unfolds. Tonight, night, 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 we'll let it go. Tonight, let it go. Let the music take control. Tonight, night, 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 go. Night, 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 go. Night, 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 go. Night, 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 go. It's been a long night. What I wanted to be over. I get lost with you. So maybe we can take this to another place. We've got nothing to lose. You hit the floor, love the way your body's moving. Get closer, show me how you wanna do it. I know we're running out of time.
I'm going to bring us back. Continue to give money. Board members will continue to pick that up. Continue to use the QR code. But I know that you're anxious for the main attraction. Reka Basu needs little introduction to everyone in the room. She is a friend to many and admired by all who are here today. In all moments, Reka inspires each of us with her courage and commitment to speak truth to power on critical issues facing many communities today. Reka is the author of Finding Her Voice, a compilation of her Des Moines Register columns on women. Heather Cox Richardson is a professor of history and author of the best-selling Democracy Awakening, Notes on the State of America. Her nightly newsletter, Letters from an American, reaches over 1 million readers and is simultaneously educational, fascinating, and truly frightening. How many of you subscribe to, look at the room. That is amazing. She recently wrote on February 22nd, she dropped one of her daily emails into over 1 million inboxes and put us all on notice regarding the state and impact of Christian nationalism. Snippets of that night's writings told us the Alabama Supreme Court on February 16, 2024 decided that cells awaiting implantation for in vitro fertilization are children and that the accidental destruction of such an embryo falls under the state's wrongful death of a minor act. In an opinion concurring with the ruling, Chief Justice Tom Parker declared that the people of Alabama have adopted the theologically based view of the sanctity of life and said that human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God. Heather told us how Speaker Mike Johnson identifies himself as Christian, has argued that the United States is a Christian nation, and has called for, quote, biblically sanctioned government. Heather shared that Charles Blow of the New York Times said, if you don't think this country is sliding toward theocracy, you're not paying attention. Now, let me tell you, I had the privilege of picking Heather up at the hotel, and we got to talk for, 15, 20 minutes in my car. It was great. And I asked her, so how many do you have on your team to help you do all of this research? It is her. It is her. To which I said, dang. I read those. I can't say that I read them every morning, but I read them every day. And if I could fangirl up here a little bit, she is amazing, and she is just a light for our world, and we are so grateful to have you in the state of Iowa and for all the work that you do and all the research that you do and all the wisdom that you bring to the millions across this country. So thank you for your work. If you will, it is my honor to bring to the stage Rick Abazu and Heather Cox Richardson.
That, Heather, you got a standing ovation and you haven't even said a word yet. Well, what happens after you've spoken?
And I would like to start, first of all, by thanking you all for welcoming me here to Iowa. As you know, I've been traveling a lot, and we made it a priority to come here because of the work you're doing here, because I have a really soft spot for the middle of the country as well. And I also want to congratulate the League of Women Voters and Rob Sands. You know, what I do is really pretty easy compared to what they do every single freaking day. So, so congratulations.
So you're here in a very meaningful week. A lot of news happened this past week.
Oh my God, it wouldn't quit, would it?
We'll get to that in a minute, but you have a room filled with hundreds of fans, and so I need to ask you a little bit about you and how you do what you do, why you do it, why you stay up until 3 in the morning.
Oh, that was bad.
Writing. I mean, you're going to be doing that tonight, and you did that last night, even though you had other stuff going on today. And I don't know where you get the energy, the momentum, the information, all by yourself. Tell us about what makes you tick.
Well, okay, let me tell you a little bit about how I write the letters. So I wake up every morning and I read through social media. I probably read the news from social media, the different channels, for about an hour and a half, just to see what people are talking about. And then I get up and I have a lot of coffee, and then I start to read through the major national papers and major city papers as well, to see what the conversation is. And it is almost always pretty much the same. And because I'm not a journalist, I'm a historian, I'm not actually looking for the breaking news necessarily. I'm looking for stories that change the narrative, change history, because what historians do is they study how and why societies change. So my great example of this is, you will notice that I didn't write anything about the Republican primary debates, because what were they going to change? I mean, I had dishes to do and grass to watch grow, and you know, there was no reason to write about those, or as far as I was concerned, even to watch them. What I did write about during one of them was the fact that President Joe Biden and Sean Fain, the president of the UAW, did a video together and put it on social media in which they each complimented each other. Now, lots of people missed that, but that was a sign of which way the labor movement was going between the political parties in the 2024 election. So I covered that, and most of the news channels covered the debates. And so what I'm looking for is not what's the latest story. What I'm looking for is, what, if I were looking back at this moment in 150 years at what's happening today, what are the things that I would put in a book about today? So then I figure out what I think the stories are. And you know, by then I've got meetings all morning and I've got other stuff to do. And by then I try to get repetitive exercise for at least an hour, because I find that really helps me think. And that helps me to put things in a form that I can then tell a story. And then usually if I'm at home, Buddy and I will have dinner, and then I'll start to write after that, which is brutal because it takes between 6 and 9 hours to write a letter, which is how they end up so late. But then I get up the next morning and do it again. And I do have to say that while I do all my own research, once I figure out what the stories are, then I research them. And that's why I do the deep dives. And, you know, I don't know the difference between the G20 and you know, G7. I have to look it up every single time, right? So I have to do all that stuff again and put it in such a way that I understand it. So if I understand it, I know other people can understand it, because I'm not a quick study on a lot of stuff. But so once I've done the research and once I've written everything, or once I've started to do the research, people do send me tips Like you may not, or may not remember, I was one of the early people to get on board the fact that we had a problem with freight trains in this country because they were super long and all that, and nobody was talking about it. And I got a message from a person who said, please don't use my name, but my boyfriend is on one of these trains and I think he's going to get killed. Can somebody write about this? And I'm like, trains? Those choo-choos, there's a problem? And then I looked into it and I'm like, holy crap, there's a real problem here. So people do send me tips, and then I work on those. But once I finish writing, then my writing goes to two people. It goes to a woman who is not herself a writer. She was involved in advertising a very long time ago. She lives on the south side of Chicago. She has an unerring eye for good writing. And she tells me whether or not it's any good. And I work incredibly hard to get her to tell me it's good. And she's the hardest person I've ever had to get anything by. And my favorite is, like, sometimes I think it's really awful, and she's like, man, that's a home run. And then it's going to go viral. And then I'll send her something and think, this one's really good. And she'll be like, well, I can't hit a home run every time. And there was one miserable night where 4 o'clock in the morning, she's like, you can't publish this, it's awful. And I'm like, but she was right. So it goes to her, and at the same time, it goes to my brilliant copy editor. And I can't put in a comma to save my life. In fact, one night, I actually just sent this woman an entire message full of 150 commas and said, here, put them where they belong. And she does comma. She doesn't do just commas. She does word choice, and she fact checks me. So that's why there are many occasions when her fact checking is significantly better than that of any major paper. And I will say, come on, Katja, I got it from the New York Times. And she's like, well, then they're wrong. And then she will say, go look it up again. And so once it gets past the two of them, then I get the magical signal. And that is, if it's finally done, Katja sends me a rat, a little image of a rat, because it's been ratified. And so I will sit there for hours being like, can't I have a rodent? And she's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm reading it right now. So that's the whole process, and then we fall into bed and we do it all again the next day.
A rat. That's hilarious. How long have you been doing this?
The first one I did was September 15th of 2019. And I did not think it was sustainable. It has, of course, become my life. And the question for why I do it is somewhat complicated in that I don't do it for me. You know, it was never about me. It was about questions that people asked me and the inclusion of this country into a language about who we are and what we could become. And I didn't ever think I would do this. People asked me to start doing it, but that it's become something that has very little to do with me. I mean, the letters are about you. You ask me questions, you want to know stuff, you cheer me on, you send tips, and I just have the skills to put them into a readable form. And people gave me those skills. I wasn't, I was very well trained. So that's part of why I do what I do. I partly do it because I care so deeply about American democracy. I believe that the ultimate goal of humanity is human self-determination, and that there is no form of government as likely to make us able to achieve human self-determination as democracy for all of its flaws. I think that that is the way that we can achieve what I consider the end goal of humanity. But I also do it because I'm a historian, and I never forget that I am the luckiest person in the world because I am keeping the record of the United States of America in one of its most crucial periods. And let me tell you, I never forget that I get to do that because of you. So thank you all for that.
Bravo for you. Okay, so let's get to some news. Donald Trump's 34 felony convictions last week has had many Democrats cheering. But should it? Trump's Republican allies in Congress are plotting revenge moves, from blocking Biden nominees from being approved to holding Democratic legislation hostage to stripping federal funding from New York. There's been a huge surge in Republican candidates' fundraising. So which side, in your view, will ultimately benefit more from Trump's convictions in November's election?
Okay, so just to be clear here, I am a prophet of the past, not of the future. But one of the things that we do is we study the patterns of the past in order to make predictions about the future. And one of the things that's going to be very important to do for the next 5 months is to recognize that you cannot trust any information coming from the Trump campaign. So we've heard there's been a lot of fundraising based on this. I ain't seen no numbers. You seen some numbers? Because I haven't. We know that the Republican National Committee is in terrible trouble for money, and so is, of course, Donald Trump, who's got a little bit of trouble with some court cases and some money he owes. So first of all, let's throw out anything that campaign says, because we can't trust it, and that's just the way it is. And we'll get the FEC numbers later, but we don't know anything about that. But so what's really interesting about this moment to me, and I'm going to say stuff I suspect that you are not expecting to hear, and that is that there is a box of donuts that has been riding on whether or not Trump is going to get the Republican nomination now, among a couple of my friends and I, since at least 8 months ago. And what's really interesting, have you noticed since the conviction, the Trump Republicans are talking about Trump as the nominee. They are saying he is the nominee. The first thing that Trump did when he came out of that courtroom is said, well, we're going to know what's going to happen on November 5th because the American people are going to vote for me. I think they're trying to lock in the idea that he's going to be the nominee because the conviction, first of all, he wasn't in a strong position anyway. He had 20% of the Republican base voting for Nikki Haley, and she wasn't even running. And crucially, if you watched, it was the suburbs that were going for her, and this election is going to be answered a lot in the suburbs. So he was already in trouble. He's in trouble financially. He's got these other cases hanging out there. He is personally completely falling apart. I don't know if you watched the interview that he did with Fox about 2 days ago. I've lost track of what day we're in, but it was very heavily edited, really heavily edited, to the point that it was clear that they were having to piece together things like the little kids on Charlie Brown when they had to piece together the words because the kids couldn't talk yet. You guys know about that, right? So he had his own problems anyway, but now he's got the problem of the fact he's a convicted felon, and they keep saying, well, more people love this than don't. And Stuart Stevens, who was a Republican operative, said that's ridiculous. You know, his base is going to be more secure in him, but you cannot tell me there's a whole bunch of independents sitting around going, wow, now that he's a convicted felon, we can't wait to get out there and vote for him. So one of the things you're seeing, I think, is an attempt to control the narrative on the part of the MAGA Republicans. He's our guy. He's going to get the nomination. But I've been leery about that for a long time because one of the things that Trump did is he turned to Paul Manafort, to manage the Republican National Convention. And we all know Manafort as being, you know, the torturer's lobbyist and working on the 2016 election and so on. But Manafort is best known for managing contested conventions. So the fact he turned to Manafort said to me, oh, wow, he's as nervous about this as I am. Right, I'm not sure that's going to happen. So going back to the conviction and what that's going to do, I think what I am seeing anyway, and we're only 2 days out, of course, we know the polls have said that, in fact, independents have broken against Trump over this. And Republicans have said they are less likely to vote for him for president. And he already had a ceiling of about 46%, and that's been the ceiling, right? That's not been the bottom, that's been the ceiling. I think that the Republican MAGAs, and I think it's important to remember these are not original Republicans. These are MAGAs, and they're very different, which we'll get to, are looking at this and saying, the MAGAs are saying, we never expected to win. Trump hasn't been trying to win this election ever. He never reached out to Nikki Haley voters. He never reached out to independents. What he's been doing is trying to fire up his base to create violence. And my impression has always been that what they were trying to do is what they talked about in 2020, which is to cause enough trouble in major states that they would not be able to certify electoral votes and it would get thrown into the House of Representatives, where those politically gerrymandered states provide a majority of Republicans, so that they could in fact install him in the presidency without the popular vote, without the electoral votes, but rather in the House of Representatives, which we can do under the 12th Amendment. It just makes sense, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sitting on the committee, but if you're running for president, why wouldn't you be trying to, I don't know, get voters? You know? So that brings up the other side of it, though. You can see the MAGAs doubling down But they're doing that because they know they're not a majority. They know they're not in power, and they're getting more and more angry and more violent as Democrats, for sure, but also independents and Republicans are saying, really? The best the Republican Party can do is a convicted felon who's been found liable for sexual assault, who owes hundreds of millions of dollars, who really can't put together a sentence, and whom nobody likes? We could swing a cat in a bar room and do better than that. And I think that what we're seeing is the violence that is going to get worse from the MAGAs, but an attempt to control the narrative so that the rest of America, the vast majority of us, don't realize that we are, in fact, the majority. And this election can be ours so long as they cannot steal it.
So when you put it, when you frame it that way, it all sounds so logical. Except, why is he so popular with, I mean, okay, a man who is guilty of sexual assault and groping women and grabbing them by the you-know-where and all of this other stuff, and paying out money secretly, and a man who once was perfectly fine with abortion rights. Why are religious people so taken by him? Why do they think he's the second coming? And what is the relationship between the MAGAs and the folks who are interested in Christian nationalism?
Okay, so there's a lot of things to pull apart there. I think it's really important to remember that Donald Trump of 2016 is not Donald Trump of 2024. Really different thing, because what happened in 2016, a lot of people forget this, Trump was the most progressive Republican on the stage in 2016. He called for closing the tax loopholes that were letting the rich people get everything. He called for infrastructure. Remember, that's why Infrastructure Week became such a big deal. He called for bringing back manufacturing to the United States, and he called for cheaper and better health care. And a lot of people, you know, there's always this, was it about the race and the sexism, or was it about the economy? It was both. And in many ways, what he did is he held up a mirror to a population that had watched its lives be hollowed out over the previous 40 years by the concept of trickle-down economics or supply-side economics, and which moved about $53 trillion from the bottom 90% of America to the top 1%. That actually happened. And he held up a mirror to them, and they had heard for 40 years now that the problems in the United States, their economic problems, were because of people of color and women. And so in a way, funny way, he was a mirror for those people. And they got on board either because they liked the sexism or racism they heard so much, or they liked the economic stuff, or they just liked the idea he was going to stick it to the government that they felt had done so much damage to them. That changed once he was in office. And mind you, he didn't win the popular vote in 2016. And now we know that he committed 34 crimes in order to be able to get into that office. Aside from all the Russia stuff, you know, that's what this trial was about. And those were 34 counts that were decided unanimously, 12-0, in a court among a jury of people like us. So he never had that majority. What happens once he's in office, though, is he takes that former rhetoric of the Republican Party and he turns it into a movement. That's a really important change, because what he did that nobody had done before him, really taking off in August of 2017 with the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, was to put his seal of approval on the far right, on the KKK, the neo-Nazis, the Proud Boys, all of those people. And he continued to egg them on throughout his presidency, so that they were the ones who were willing to stand with him to enable him to steal the presidency in 2020. And when you create a fascist movement, which is what this is, once you have gotten the people behind you, your followers behind you, the worse you behave, the more tightly they cling to you. And theorists like Hannah Arendt have explained why that's the case, or Eric Hoffer, who wrote True Believer in 1951. They do that because they have to believe in that person, the worse he behaves, because otherwise they're going to have to make a break and say, I was wrong to follow him and I'm the bad guy rather than the people he is picking on. And you can see it if you follow Joe Walsh on Twitter. He talks a lot about how hard it was to break away from the MAGA movement because he lost all his friends, he had to rethink everything, the world got really shaken up. So now he's got those sets of people behind them. Well, who are they? That goes back to the longer history of the Republican Party, and that is that under Reagan, who took office in 1981, by 1986, the Reagan Republicans recognized that they did not have a majority behind them. And so Edwin Meese, who is Attorney General for Ronald Reagan, says, you know how we can preserve the Reagan Revolution so voters can never overrule it? We can put all our people in the courts. That starts in 1986 with Edwin Meese. And Edwin Meese, by the way, is the one who's going to be arguing on June 21st in front of Judge Eileen Cannon, about whether or not the special counsel Jack Smith has been properly appointed or not, even though the U.S. District Attorney, the District Court in Washington, D.C., said in 2019 that, in fact, special counsels were constitutional. She's going to rehear it, and one of the people arguing to say they're not is Edwin Meese. Who knew he was still alive, I have to say. But so... You should have. So they did that. They also started talking about ballot integrity, by which they actually said we're going to kick black people off the vote. This is where we get the start of the whole idea that Democrats only win by cheating, and that's going to take off after the Motor Voter Act of 1993. By 1996, you have Republicans saying the only reason they're losing is because Democrats are cheating. But you also have, in 1986, the deliberate attempt to bring evangelical white Americans into the Republican coalition. Now, they had started being there in 1978, 1979 with the southern wing of the reform, there's a lot of different words for it. The fundamentals. The right-wing ring, never mind, I can't say that. The Southern Baptist Conference broke. And the conservative end of it, the ones who wanted to get rid of women having rights, the ones who were in favor of segregation and so on, get co-opted into the Republican coalition in 79 and 80. And in 1986, they very deliberately create an organization, Americans for Tax Reform, that says the businessmen will come up with the libertarian platform to get rid of taxes and to get rid of business regulation, but the evangelicals will provide the votes. That's actually virtually a direct quote, that they will provide the votes. And that idea was always that they would provide the votes and then we would get tax cuts and we would get an end to business regulation. What Trump did is he flipped the script and said, I'm going to put the evangelicals in power, because the evangelicals like me, the white evangelicals, not true black evangelicals, white evangelicals like me because I keep saying I will not let their policies get tripped up by the courts or by any of our norms. I will simply get rid of the Justice Department. I will get rid of the civil service. I will get rid of all the ways in which our society has protected the rights of women, black Americans, people of color, LGBTQ. And even though I cheat on my wives and all that sort of thing, and I'm vile and et cetera, I'm the strong man who will give you everything you want. And that's why they're with him.
That is really interesting. That's a really interesting analysis. Thank you. So let's talk about abortion. We know that a majority of Americans support the legal right of women to have abortions. And yet, since the U.S. Supreme Court ruling turning the issue back to the states, we know that 1 in 3 American women of childbearing years lives in one of the more than 20 states with abortion prohibitions. In 14 states, abortion is banned outright. And here in Iowa, we have a 6-week ban that was signed into law but is on hold until a court rules on it. Yet, polls are suggesting nationally that abortion will be a 2nd or 3rd tier issue in November on the ballot. Where do you see this going? And what's the best strategy for ensuring reproductive rights at a national level?
So I love the idea that abortion is 2 or 3 on the list.
Love the idea, sorry?
I love the idea that it's 2 or 3 on the list.
You do?
How many of you believe it's 2 or 3 on the list? I was at a wonderful meeting, or a meeting with a number of people, and we were talking about mostly women, but maybe 40% men. And one of the young men said, I understand that abortion was important in 2022, but how on earth is it still going to be salient in 2024? And every woman at the table turned around and went, I think the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision is a game changer. Democrats have outperformed by 8 points every single time anything related to abortion rights has been on the ballot since the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision. And that's never going to go away. Anybody who says it is the guy who said, how is it still going to be salient? Because there is nothing more salient than bodily autonomy. And I will say something more than that. If you look at the 2022 elections, you can see that it is not only Republican women who voted in favor of the protection for reproductive rights. Republican men did too, because they care about their families. And the other important thing I think about Dobbs, and perhaps we'll talk about the Supreme Court, the other important thing about Dobbs is that, of course, it's got all kinds of other rights wrapped up in it for women. But if the Supreme Court in the United States of America can take away a right, a constitutional right that we have recognized for 49 years, just on their say-so, and mind you, there's a little bit of problems with some of the people who sit on the Supreme Court right now.
Yes.
I think that people who might not necessarily think that abortion rights are a number one issue recognize that if they can take away that right, they can take away the right to contraception, which is already on the table for all that the Republicans are running madly from it. It is on the table. In fact, there's like this senator somewhere in the Midwest named Ernst. People are already talking about getting rid of Plan B, for example. NIUDs, but Plan B. That's on the table. Clarence Thomas suggested in the gerrymandering case of a couple of weeks ago or something, I can't remember when it was, that Brown versus Board of Education was wrongly decided. I mean, what they're doing is they're unraveling everything that we have lived under since World War II. And the issue about why people still adhere to Donald Trump, as I say, has a number of layers to it. But we know now, any political scientist will tell you, that anybody who is informed about what is going on in this country breaks heavily for the Democrats and Joe Biden. The problem is that most people aren't informed, or they're getting their information from TikTok and from Rumble. And that is a huge problem, because if people actually know what's happening, they break as much as 45 points for Biden. And so is Dobbs a number 2 or number 3 issue? That's just wrong. I mean, there's many problems with polls, but I mean, I'm inarticulate because that's somebody saying it's not important to me, so it must not be important to, I don't know, 200 million women.
So, speaking of the Supreme Court, Justice Alito has had this upside-down flag hanging outside his house in New Jersey, and then he's got another one where he has another property, the Appeal to Heaven flag, right? And Clarence Thomas's wife actually helped lead the Stop to Steal campaign and marched along with those folks on January 6th. And yet, they won't recuse themselves from voting on Trump's effort to subordinate the election results. What can be done with them? Can they be just like packed up somewhere and sent off while decisions are being made? Well, Liberia?
Well, so there's something else with Clarence Thomas. So there was a report out today from, anybody remember? Oh, crap, I can't grab it.
What does it say?
That he has taken as much as $4 million in gifts while he's sitting that we know of, while he's been sitting in that chair. I mean, pretty lucrative for
being
him.
A Supreme Court justice.
Being a Supreme Court justice. And what just fries my bacon is that Citizens United in 2010 was decided by a 5-4 vote. So that's both Alito and Clarence Thomas were the ones who let unlimited money flow into our elections. And similarly, Shelby County versus Holder, 2013, that gutted the Voting Rights Act, 5-4 votes, same two guys. And now, of course, we have Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett also on the court under somewhat shady circumstances, all of them. So this is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem not only in the case of those particular people, the flags and so on, and of course you may or may not have seen it today, and you're not going to read it from me because this is also the anniversary of D-Day, of course, as you know, but I feel like that we need to honor. But you may hear about it from me in the future. Alito gave that story about how his wife flew the flag for a day because she was mad at her neighbor.
Yeah, I don't get that.
The neighbor did an interview and said, no, they flew it for a month. well, and apparently has evidence of that because there was a police report at some point. And why does that matter? Because he put in writing to Congress that he'd only flown it for a day, et cetera. And it's against the law to lie to Congress. It's not allowed against the law to lie if you're in Congress, but you can't lie to Congress. I'm not making that up. So, but the real crisis for us as a democracy is that we have 3 branches of government, and the Supreme Court is the one that operates only on the belief that we trust it. And the trust in the Supreme Court has now dropped to a point that I think is below that of the Taney Court that gave us the Dred Scott decision. And mind you, that was a pretty low bar. So that's a problem for our democracy. And the short term, there's not a ton we can do. There's a couple of issues with the Supreme Court that are systemic. One is that it didn't used to have to be a thing where you got carried out toes up. People went on and off the court and they were like, oh, I'm here for a while, then I'll retire, I'll go do something else. The court was also set up with the idea that people had to travel around on horses. So they didn't want to be on it very long because could you see, like, I don't know, Clarence Thomas riding a horse around? And people also, when the founding fathers or the framers were writing the Constitution, we didn't have modern medicine, so people didn't live forever either. And that's a problem that is systemic now in our democracy as a whole. Until 2 Congresses ago was the oldest one we had on record because nobody ever died, right? Which is just different than what we've had before and poses a real problem in many different ways. But so there's the problem that people don't retire, that they're living a really long time, and that makes them quite out of step. But there is also the problem that this court has lost the support of the American people. So where do we go with that? First of all, keep pressure on the obvious ones. Mitch McConnell, nobody picks on him anymore because he says, I don't care, but he ought to hear about it. Dick Durbin of Illinois, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Congress has a number of powers over the Supreme Court. Among those, it could just stop funding them, which of course it wouldn't want to do, but it could do that. But I will point out that Samuel Alito is 74 years old, Justice Thomas is 75 years old. They could retire if there were enough pressure on them to do so. Now, they're never going to do it voluntarily because the whole point is they don't believe they owe anything to the American people. And that's a problem because they do, and we have to make our wishes known on that. And, you know, White House of Rhode Island in the Senate is putting a lot of pressure on them. But this is going to be a much longer-term project than fixing in the next several months. I would also say we do need to expand the court. You don't want to do it right before an election for a number of reasons, but the last time the court was expanded was in 1869 when U.S. Grant was president. We've grown a little bit since then. We also have 13 circuits now instead of 9, and we should at least expand it to 13. So the Supreme Court's a problem. I'll also point out, people don't like me to say this, lawyers especially, the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the right of judicial review. They took that upon themselves in 1803 with Marbury versus Madison. Now, I happen to be a supporter of judicial review, but they took that upon themselves. Congress could say, no, you don't have that right. We're going to take that on ourselves. And there are many, we don't have to sit here and, we're all sitting here watching to see what the Supreme Court hands down because they're handing down their decisions now. And I'm like, there's 331 million of us waiting to decide what 5 people, 6 if you want to throw in Roberts, who we know are compromised want to do with our lives. And that, to me, is not acceptable.
So, I just want to mention this piece that Jamie Raskin had in the New York Times a couple of days ago. He's the Democratic congressman from Maryland who said that there are things, and he's calling upon 7 of the justices in the Supreme Court to take this up on one of 2 grounds. One is that the Constitution's due process clause, or the other is the federal statute mandating judicial disqualification for questionable impartiality. So if they would take that up, or if the U.S. attorney would take that up, then there are grounds, or the attorney general would take that up, then he says that there are grounds for potentially getting them disqualified. So I don't know if that goes anywhere, but that's just another thing to throw into the mix.
Well, he's a constitutional professor, constitutional law professor.
Yes.
So if anybody knows it, Jamie Raskin knows.
Jamie Raskin knows, exactly. I want to ask you about something that you have written about, which is that the media doesn't pay enough attention to Biden's successes economically. And I wonder if, so I'm going to push back just a little bit and say, is Biden himself, is his administration, or is the Democratic Party doing enough to call attention to Biden's successes economically? Do you think it's the media's fault?
So I don't think it's just the economic policies. You know,
other policies.
By any stretch of the imagination, this administration has been one of the most successful in American history, certainly the most successful since at least LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society. But you could even push him all the way back to, and I would push him all the way back to FDR's New Deal, because Biden is changing the entire relationship between individuals and the government in the same way that FDR did, in the same way that Reagan did. So the question, and I could wax at length about that because that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the country. I'm actually not terribly interested in any administration. I'm interested in the country at large. But I would actually say, I got a phone call from an editor once and said, you know, we just don't get it because you talk all the time about democracy. Why doesn't the administration ever talk about it? And I actually used the word gobsmacked. I said, I am gobsmacked because every single day, either President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, or Secretary of State Antony Blinken, sometimes Janet Yellen at the Treasury, gives a speech about democracy, and you never cover it. And I said, I don't even know how to tell you how to answer that because it's everywhere, but it's simply not being covered. And that raises the question, I think, of why not? And I think that's somewhat a complicated question. I would say that I do think that really since at least Nixon, the sense not only among the press, but also among the American people is to say, the president sucks. Whatever they're doing, it's bad. Because they're a really easy figure not to like. And if you say, I really like what they're doing, then somebody else comes up to you and says, they suck, right? And you're always vulnerable if you say you like something. So I think there's partly, well, somebody's in power, I got to criticize them. So I think that's part of it. I also think that covering a person like Biden who is running, he's swinging for the fences every day. He's laying his heart on the line every day, and he's saying, I really, really, really love this country, is a little embarrassing, to be like, we're too cool to say, I really love this country. Like, I don't know if you saw the fist he made today when the airplanes flew over in the missing man formation. I don't know if you knew that was a missing man formation, but he's at the commemoration of D-Day today, and the planes flew over, and I'm not going to tell you what he does, but I found it very moving. And it's not something you would have seen from any other president that I can think of before him. And I will also point out he is the first president we've had, and I'm tired, so I'm not going to go through in my head all the different presidents, but who actually had a family member in the service. So for all that Republicans have talked so much about they care about the troops, he literally cared about the troops. And they've worked very hard to attack him on his stance with regard to the troops. I think that's why when they went after him so hard on Afghanistan, because it was a way to undercut that he literally had people in the service. So I think it's partly embarrassing to cover the idea that you really love this country. I think that's one of the reasons people like me is I'm willing to say I love this country. But then I also think that it's very, very hard to cover anything but Donald Trump. Because, and I actually wrote this to someone today, so they said, why doesn't anybody talk about Kamala Harris? Why isn't she doing anything? And I wrote this long thing back, and I said, well, she did this, and 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 then I said, but she's complicated. It's complicated. Our policies in Africa are complicated. And when you've got Trump saying, I have every right to go after the people who attacked me, that's a really easy story to write. And I promise you, sometimes at like 11:30, I'm like, what did Trump do today? You know? So far, I haven't succumbed to that, but it's much easier to have a simple story than to really dig in. And the American media has been under such attack, both financially and ideologically and simply physically now for so long. I notice a real difference between when somebody calls me for information from another country, usually Europe. They always are like, let's just chat. You know, I want to understand the filibuster. And I've got 2 hours. Can you talk to me about the filibuster? And they're not writing a story. They're just looking for background. Americans call you, they're like, my deadline's at 3 o'clock. Can you tell me what you think about this vote? And it's just a really different thing. Yeah. So I think I think the Democrats and the administration are tripping over themselves. And mind you, you can get on, I have no inside information. You have access to all this stuff yourself. They're throwing stuff on the websites all the time. Did you know the White House has a press conference every single day? So does the Defense Department, so does Commerce, so does the State Department, every single day. You ever see it in the papers? That's what historians will look at in 150 years, that's what historians will look at. They will not look at Twitter.
Okay, so I'm getting the signal that we are running out of time, but I did promise you, I want you all to know this, I promised Heather that the final question would lead to a note of hope to conclude with, and I think that's a really great idea. Now, unfortunately, the way I'm going to frame this question, it's not going to sound very hopeful at all, but she's going to turn it around into something super hopeful in her own inimitable way. So here goes. So given some of the long-range structural changes that have been put in place as the United States Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United, allowing disproportionate corporate influence on elections, gerrymandering by states to favor or suppress certain voting blocks, filibusters, you probably have 2 hours to explain those, book bans in schools, curbs on what can be taught in higher education, where do you find hope for restoring democracy and seeing action on pressing priorities like racial justice, immigration reform, gun control? What role can and should ordinary Americans play in achieving those goals? What does resistance look like?
So the reason I like to end on this note is that we're in a really scary time. You know, every morning I open Twitter or, the other social media apps, and you just can't believe it. When I saw the other day that House Speaker Mike Johnson had put Scott Perry on the Intelligence Committee, I was like, I actually just asked Connie if she would organize a march for us. Because I don't know how to organize a march, but I'm like, really? Like, that's like over the edge. I mean, Ronnie Jackson, yeah, he's got his own thing going on, but Scott Perry, like, things are scary when you open the news and you see everything that's going on. And people always say to me, how can I be hopeful in the midst of all this? And I always say that I am far more hopeful today than I was in 2015. And the reason for that is that people like me who have been following this long-term plan to take over the American government, because let's face it, the United States of America is the most valuable real estate on the planet, and I don't mean the value of its land. I mean, if you can control the United States of America, you control the world. And we should never forget that. We get very comfortable, but we should never forget that. This place is a prize that a lot of people want to have. And this plan to institute minority rule over the majority of us has been going on, as I say, since at least 1986. And, you know, when we talked, for example, about voter ID laws in the 1980s or signing statements, remember signing statements when George W. Bush used a signing statement to overturn Congress's express rule that there would not be torture in the United States of America, that we would not engage in that. And George Bush had a signing statement in which he signed the law into effect, and with it he said, but I will interpret it in my own way so long as I have the right to protect American citizens. He said, I'm going to continue to use torture because I think I can do that. Those, by the way, you know who came up with that idea? It was at the time a very little known guy in the Justice Department, staff lawyer in the Justice Department. You might have heard of him. His name was Samuel Alito. No one cared. You know, we would talk about it and people would be like, signing statements, like, isn't that where someone gets a pen? And, you know, our heads would explode. And when I look around me now and I see rooms like this all over this country, and you all don't know you're part of this movement, but you are part of a movement, I am incredibly hopeful. And what this moment looks like to me is the 1850s. And when I say that, that rarely makes people feel comfortable. But the reason I say it is because what happened in the 1850s was if you lived in 1853 and you looked around you, the elite enslavers had taken over the US government. They had the Senate, they had the White House, and they had the Supreme Court. They didn't have the House of Representatives, so you didn't have to pay a great deal of attention. Everybody, especially in the North, was like, you know, we're busy building railroads and moving to cities and moving out west, and so, you know, we don't really care a lot about the government. It looked very much like America in 2015, for example. And then in 1854, those elite enslavers overreached, and they pushed through the House of Representatives the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And what the Kansas-Nebraska Act did was it permitted human enslavement to move into the American West. And the reason that that mattered, aside from the way it mattered to enslaved people, was that it meant that the western part of the United States would become slave states. Those slave states would work with the southern slave states in the Senate and the House of Representatives to take over the entire country, and America would be a slave-owning country. And with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, ordinary Americans, and remember at the time only white men, largely white men of property, could vote, they looked at each other and they said, listen, we may not agree about immigration, we may not agree about finances, we may not agree about internal improvements, but by God, we can agree that we do not want to turn our democracy over to a small group of oligarchs. And the day after the Kansas-Nebraska Act passes through the House of Representatives, there's a meeting in Washington of 30 congressmen. They actually meet in Mrs. Crutchett's boarding house because she has the best food. Her great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughters are the ones who run that Scenic Route Bakery over there, I think. You know, that's, if you haven't met that one, that's phenomenal over there by where I'm staying. And they actually met in Edward Dickinson's rooms. He was a representative from Massachusetts, and you might have heard of his daughter. She was pretty good at poetry. Not kidding. Emily Dickinson's father, there's only like 6 people in the 19th century, and they do the rest with mirrors. But they meet, and they go into this meeting, and they're Whigs, and they're know-nothings, and they're Free Soilers, and they're Democrats, and they go into this meeting, and they come out, and they say, we're going to put all our differences aside until we beat back what they called the slave power. They don't have a name yet. By 1856, they're going to have a name. They're going to be the Republican Party, and they're going to sweep the House of Representatives. By 1859, there's a young lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln who begins to articulate an entirely new concept of the relationship between individuals and the government. He says, rather than working for elite rich guys and protecting property and doing nothing else, we should be working for ordinary Americans, making sure they have access to education and to resources and are treated equally before the law. By 1860, when only white men could vote, they put Abraham Lincoln into the White House on a platform that says that human enslavement will not move to the American West, thereby being kept in the American South where they expected it would eventually die out. By 1863, he has signed the Emancipation Proclamation, putting the United States on the road to ending human enslavement. By November of 1863, he has given the Gettysburg Address and dedicated the nation to a new birth of freedom and rededicated the American people to make sure that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. 9 years. In 9 years, they went from the rich guys get it all to we're getting rid of human enslavement and recreating the United States in an entirely new way based on the idea that we are treated equally before the law and have a right to a say in our government the same way the Declaration of Independence said. So when I look out at you all and all over this country where I've been traveling for 6 months and seeing these huge crowds of people who are all scared, as we should be, coming together to say, by God, we may not agree about finances, we may not agree about immigration, we may not agree about any number of things, but we can agree that we do not want to hand our nation over to a group of elite theocrats. I have a lot of hope.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful note to end on. Your knowledge of history is formidable.
Thank you, everybody. Let's do this, right? Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Loved it.
So let's
You're
go.
amazing.
If I can have your attention just for 2 minutes, I promise. Thank you, Heather Cox Richardson. Thank you so much. What an amazing opportunity for us to listen on your conversation and to hear firsthand your thoughts on where we are in this grand experiment of a democracy. Thank you to Reka in leading that conversation and the preparation that you brought for tonight. Thank you to all of our sponsors, all of the folks. Congratulations to our awardees. We are so excited to be part of the work with you and for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you to our board members, especially John McCormley and all the board members who helped tonight. Thank you to Kristen Clark, who is over at the tech table, and Bridget Fagan-Reedburn, two amazing colleagues that I get to work with every day. Heather Cox Richardson's book is still available out in the hallway, as well as Interfaith Alliance of Iowa t-shirts. You can purchase it there also. Thank you for using your voice, for being part of this work. I am so grateful to each of you. Thank you, and I wish you the best.